Camera off. Camera on.
Haha!
This is very much the very basic edition of 4020 NOT live because, well, the cameras are back on. I can't really edit it because we're on the emerging laptop because I broke the good one. So there's no graphics, no nothing. For the podcast listeners, they won't know the difference. They'll expect it to be the same ramshackle program, but hopefully the even cheaper headset I'm using today is better than the one I usually use, which is terrible, I've been told. Phil, how are you?
I'm all right, yes. I can't work out what day it is because these bank holidays throw me. It feels as though it's probably the middle of autumn, but apparently it's May, and we're all getting giddy about fans coming back to sporting events. But some chickens are coming home to roost as regards things like the TV deal. So it's been an interesting bank holiday weekend, and also trying to, again, people keep in touch with what's happening normally via social media, and there was an extensive blackout, which was adhered to by most, and it's amazing how much you don't get to hear if you're not scrolling through your Twitter feed, which actually is quite cathartic, but also meant that we probably missed out on some of the stories that were happening as they happened.
I am sticking with my theory that it was probably all a waste of time, because nothing seems to have changed in the 12 hours or whatever since the boycott. But what was really amused me about it all was the number of people who, come midnight, tweeted, "Oh, look at me! I did the blackout, and now I'm back." And it's like, no, that's not the point. That's not the point.
It wasn't virtue signalling, was it? Oh, sorry, I shouldn't mention that. Talking of social media, and how would we best describe it? Insensitive comments.
I mean, well, that's the other thing, isn't it? It's amazing the amount of times things happen where you think people react to something and you go, "But you already knew that, and you didn't say that before. So why have you waited until now to say something? Why? Well, I know why, but why?"
Well, I also think, and you know, we've been saying for, was it now 7 years? #realistic Rugby League. That there was going to be an issue within the Super League women's early season fixtures because the big teams were consistently being drawn against the teams that weren't as experienced as they are. And it's not just that the sides that will finish probably outside of the top four were doing it the odd week and having to raise their game. They're having to do it every week, and that is just the most ridiculously tough ask. But that's the way the fixtures have been structured this year, so that the intense games come at the end of the season to help prepare players for the World Cup. And whether we like it or not, that's the way that it's been deemed to be the most effective for the players. But of course, by putting out a tweet saying virtually what's the point of having something called Super League when it clearly isn't, and an almost snide addition saying, "I do hope the girls and women are okay," you then lose the fact that the big story in the women's game last week was that there's been a Southern Super League edition added, which will start in July, 6 teams. Nobody really knows what the standard is going to be like, but it's going to be branded under Super League, which immediately gives you 16 teams playing under that banner as opposed to 10. I suspect that the teams in the southern half will all be relatively evenly matched because they're all at a similar sort of stage of development. Brilliant that the British Army women will be breaking ground, I think, to be the first in a league structure. Fantastic that there is a team representing Wales because, again, we said, wouldn't it be great if they're going to be playing an international that gap in the pathway is filled in? Well, they have. It's going to be based in Cardiff, but effectively that is the Wales Rugby League running a female, and even they use the term franchise. To me, this is got more dynamism and foresight about it than what's happening in the men's professional game at the moment. So all of that was lost by a totally unnecessary comment about some scores that happened to be quite wide over the weekend that shouldn't have come as a surprise to anybody.
Because they were predictable, as we said. And as was shown in 2019. there was a gap between the top and the bottom. That gap has now increased in a sense because the players who play in the England performance squad have had more training than the others because of their status. That's not the fault of the other clubs. There's nothing they can do about that because of the restrictions we've been living in. But it was always going to be the fact that there would be some big scores. Perhaps not as big as, I didn't expect St Helens to win by 86 points against Bradford. Did I expect them to score 90 against Huddersfield? Looking at the live blog, if they'd have kicked their goals, they would have scored 100. And I don't think we should be necessarily surprised at that. I still stand by, maybe they have put too many teams in the competition. That's not a criticism of those players. That's not a criticism of those clubs. It's a criticism, a constructive one, of wanting the competition to be as intense as it can be. But as I said the other week when John was on, and I'll say it again now, the players who we've all spoken to disagree with us. So who are we to say anything other? This is just an opinion. But this is where there's no subtlety in debate anymore, is there? If you say something that is perceived as negative, you are against something. Obviously, those tweets were not constructive. But even if you have a constructive opinion, people say, oh, well, you just, I was at those games on Sunday at Wakefield. You cannot fault the effort of Featherstone Rovers. Leeds to just a very good team. They won the double last time out. Wakefield, when I saw them play Castleford 2 years ago in the Challenge Cup, they lost 100-0. Now it's 44 this time. That suggests one team may have got better, one team may have regressed slightly. And that might be about the right assumption on the game. Well, I tell you what it does say about that game. Castleford's defence was stifling. Wakefield had one chance in 80 minutes. And you're going to score nil if you only have one chance, because you've got to be perfect to convert that chance. But again, they didn't give up. There are some talented players in these squads who are lower down the division. The worry would be, of course, that they get picked off by the bigger clubs who stockpile players as if they were Wigan in the late 80s. But you're not knocking the effort of these players. You're not necessarily knocking the players. They're only as good as they can be. It's the situation that the teams and the clubs and the players have been put in that's possibly what we're criticising. Well,
you interviewed players from the two heavily beaten teams at the doubleheader at Wakefield. Neither of those interviews said, this is unfair, we don't want to be part of this, next week I'm handing my boots in because we're getting beaten heavily. They all said, it's great to be back, it's a great experience, we're playing against some really talented opposition, the best way we can learn is to keep playing a level above ourselves, and actually, we took some positives out of that performance, and what more do you want? I think what happened at York last week, which I think John Flatman intimated when he spoke to us on the previous podcast, and has now been formally announced, that they've attracted Lindsay Anfield, and I think if you were to say at the beginning of the last full season that Lindsay was going to leave a team like Castleford that were on the verge of winning everything to join a development club like York, that was never a possibility. Now she's seeing the potential at a club like York. She wants to get involved. Adam Cuthbertson is who we know has a fantastic track record in the women's game over the last couple of years, has been brought in as director of performance. I mean, that's not coach. That's looking at all the things the girls need, the women need to have to be the best that they can be. That is going to attract some players, clearly. And you're looking at a team that is outside the top four at the moment, making significant plans with a World Cup coming to their venue to be the best they can be. Well, the more clubs that do that, the more that London Broncos, they're going to have a great talent pool to choose from. The more that Cardiff play the game at a level whereby women and girls get the experience to play against better players, the better they're going to be. I don't think we should be apologising for this. I don't remember anybody saying when Liverpool Football Club lost a game by 7 goals earlier this season that they should immediately be thrown into the Championship. I don't know what you expect barely 4 years into a competition where they've had to have a year off anyway. So a very injudicious comment, I would have said, that actually, if it had a positive attached to it, seemed to galvanise a lot of people in response to it, saying, that's not really a valid summation of where we are.
I did speak to both captains after the Wakefield and Castleford game, but my phone failed on me, as technology seems to have done this week. But Danny Swain was, very positive about Wakefield's performance and how they had improved, and as you say, and we've seen more, excuse me, from the result last week and the tightness of the scoreline between Wakefield and York in the Challenge Cup. I think tells us more about the competition than this week's results. And again, it's not saying anything that isn't obvious to anyone who's paid any little attention to the competition in the last year. I just ignore last year and just don't say 2 years, in the last couple of years or whatever. And that one of the problems with the likes of Bradford and Featherstone is when they were dominating the sport, and when will it have been? 2017? Yes, it was 2017 because we were at Old Trafford ahead of the grand final between Castleford and Leeds. And Kirsty Roney was there representing Bradford, and Natalie Harrywell, rest in peace, was there representing Featherstone because they were about to play in their grand final. And they'd been invited to the media day alongside the men for, I think, the first time. There was no Leeds Rhinos at that point. There was no, St Helens had just kind of started up. So those teams weren't around to take away the best players from the two dominant clubs. But that has happened now. That happens. It's like you can use the example of football, can't you? Whenever, before the Premier League, whoever was dominating, well, it was Liverpool, but things are cyclical, and unfortunately, big teams come around. Leeds have obviously got money behind them, and you can attract better players, not because of money in terms of what they're being paid, but in terms of facilities.
Yeah, I think also we look at what the NRL are doing, and they've done it the other way. But even they're now talking about expansion, that they're going from 4 teams to 6 this year, with the plan of going to 8 the year after. That I don't think you can stop the march of the women's game, and I don't think you'd want to, because again, you're looking at a whole new avenue and marketing approach that this week, again, we've been shown there is a limit at the moment to what the men's game can offer. So anybody who talks about an element of predictability in a women's results, the men's Super League table at the moment is becoming increasingly predictable. And clearly there will be some teams at the bottom who will knock off the odd team from the top. But there are very few people, if you ask them today, after 5 of the 25 rounds, we're only a fifth of the way into the season, will not be saying, it'll be a St Helens Wigan grand final. And it's very hard to argue against that at the moment on what we've seen. And yes, I'm sure Castleford will have their day against some of the big teams. And Warrington and Hull are putting together runs of consistency, and Catalan have started the season well. But at the moment, you'd have to look a very long way to find odds on it not being the same repeat grand final as we had in November. And so, why pick on the women's game? It just makes no sense.
Well, I have to say, thank you to the RFL, who made it a very easy process to speak to people after the game in a not easy situation. And that was good. And it was nice to be back in the ground. It's the first time I've been in over a year. It was nice to be home. I'd forgotten how bloody cold Bellevue is. And what was also good is that the full-time employed media members of staff for both Wakefield and Castleford, at least, were there in the ground doing stuff on the matches. And what I would say is Saints was very good because you could keep an eye on their live blog. Wigan, it took about a couple of hours after their game to get a result. And I know we had a blackout and whatever, but come on, you've got to be quicker, got to be on the ball. People want to know what's going on, which is good. I mean, the ground watching on Twitch, it was about 10 seconds behind real time, which was bizarre. What I will miss when fans are back is the noise of players in contact, because it's just ridiculous. And being able to hear Caitlin Beavers just scream at all their teammates to tell them where to stand and what to do. Like refereeing them, get back. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And Leeds winning again. can't cope with this. But
I think you need to say Leeds women.
Leeds women, because Leeds Men in Crisis. That's what we adapted the hashtag to. No, it was. I enjoyed myself, and it was nice to be out there. I don't know when I'm going to go to a game again, but it was nice to be at a game and do some stuff. And hopefully, people enjoyed the post match we put out there. There's nothing more to say about the women's Super. We've been relentlessly realistic about things. So, and again, it's good to see it on the telly. Even if it is a 72 nil, it doesn't matter. People have enjoyed the tries and stuff. And
well, again, as we said either last week or previously, you can equate 10 points in rugby league to a goal in football. So they've just shown Leeds effectively beat Featherstone, let's say 7-0. Well, there's plenty of women's football that's on prime-time terrestrial TV where Chelsea would beat, I don't know, Reading 7-0, and nobody pulls their hair out about it. They just go, what an amazing goal, and what a fabulous piece of skill, and isn't it great? And again, the bits that I saw of the first half, there was a lot to admire. Even if a team is winning comfortably, the creativity that they are showing to keep getting the ball to the right places and score points is to be admired. And we need to learn to do that a little bit more, rather than say, "Oh well, it wasn't competitive." Just to admire what you're being shown.
Good to see the columnist on the pitch as well, back in action. Even mentioned by her captain after the match.
Really?
Yeah.
Was she praised?
She was back. Yeah, she was back.
I know she was back.
That's praise, I think. She was back. We got her back. She's in the team. And Courtney Winfield-Hill is brilliant. She's great. Just far too good for our sport. And some of the some players in the other Super League should take her lead on things. But there you go. And clubs. So that's that wrapped up. You mentioned watching women's football on terrestrial TV. Obviously, we're all now waiting to see all of the Super League on the BBC. Now everyone thinks that because it's not an exclusive deal with Sky, everything's going to be on BBC One. Clearing the schedules on a Friday night.
I have to tell you, having spoken to somebody who works for the BBC,
it's going to be on BBC Two.
It's not going to happen.
Oh, you mean people on the internet have come up with some weird suggestion and gone, well, that's it. On BBC One.
I think there is an understanding that just because something is available, it doesn't mean that it's going to be shown. There are two things that came out of the discussion about these 10 games that are now going to be free to air. Is in the actual press conference, press release. We'll come on to the conference in a minute. It says on Sky's free to air channels. Well, so it could be on the Food Channel then. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be on anywhere other than, say, Sky One, a non-sport channel. It actually said in the release, Sky's free-to-air channels. That's not the BBC. But apparently the BBC do not have the wherewithal to put, or even perhaps the scheduling, to put Super League on 10 times a year at a 3 o'clock in the afternoon prime-time slot. So as far as the person involved with the BBC is concerned, there is no plans for them to show it. In the same way that because Channel 4 may have a headquarters here, they're automatically not going to be on the phone to what used to be Red Hall, but now apparently is a caravan somewhere in Manchester, saying, can we show your game? It's not a caravan, by the way, if anybody's listening. It's temporary offices.
The ITV Sport archive is held in Leeds, so maybe they could show it on ITV4 at 3 in the morning. It is that typical. Here's a little bit of reading between the lines, and then everyone goes mad and writes things that I don't know, and it leads to people being disappointed by something that was never going to happen in the first place, which is ridiculous. The TV deal is less, as you exclusively revealed last week on the programme. To which some people are going, ooh. Some people are going, where are we standing on this? I guess we expected it, didn't we? But it's disappointing, but not unexpected.
I think there are a couple of things that immediately came to mind. One is nobody should be surprised. We have been talking for 18 months in all the various parts of the media. I mean, there was even a paper produced that was given to the media by the Championship clubs almost 2.5 years ago, when there was the breakaway of Super League, saying if this deal is £30 million or below, we're getting nothing. So none of this should be coming as a surprise. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're going to have a press conference, and full credit to Ken Davey, the interim chairman, for wanting to do one, you're going to be asked two questions effectively by the media. One is, how much is the deal? And the second one is, how much of the deal is going to filter down to the other clubs in the Championship and League One and Red Hall? And on both of them, he said, I'm not going to answer those questions. In which case, don't have a press conference, to be honest, because I think you've either got to be brazen up front and say, this is the deal and these are the plans that we already have in force of how we're going to deal with it. Not, this is the deal, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you wouldn't be wrong in thinking we've taken a bit of a haircut and now we're going to start the discussions with everybody else about what that actually means. It just makes you all the time look incredibly reactive. I think, again, all of the some of the reaction from the clubs outside of Super League saying we're waiting to hear, and I think they have known in their heart of hearts for at least 18 months that they need to start budgeting as if they're not going to get any central income, and that if they're not sustainable as a club without central funding, there's going to be a day of reckoning coming up in the not too distant future. And again, you can't suddenly start from now to work that out. We know and are good friends with some people at Coventry, and they've been telling us right from when they first started, they will continue. They'll develop players in the sport in the West Midlands because their financial model is one of self-sustainability. And you look at the league table every year and they are perhaps towards the bottom of League One. But what they have is a club a bit like West Wales, ironically, who are economically sound. But there are other clubs that are in the Championship and League One, some very famous and historic names, who, if you were to withdraw their central funding, would virtually be ceasing to exist as they currently do. But none of this should come as a surprise. We've been talking about this for absolutely ages. I think it is sad that I watched Ian Lenigan's interview before the Wigan Hull game on Sky. And whilst I absolutely fully respect what Ian has done to keep Wigan going, particularly at this most difficult time, he sounded like a man in denial. You cannot keep saying, everything's fine, the game's healthy, we're really pleased with the viewing figures. Believe me, if you weren't getting viewing figures now when fans can't get into stadiums, you would have a television deal that was worth absolutely nothing. It's only the fact that those figures have held up at this time when you would expect them to, that you've got anything at all. I think the other thing that is going to be really interesting is, how do they divvy up the money? Because if it's right that it is about £26 million, it's effectively a 40% reduction. If you assume that every one of the 11 Super League clubs who are getting the full money and the 12th who will drop out of the league anyway is getting a lesser money, if they are getting 40% of what they're on at the moment, are they going to make that 50% and divvy up sufficient for the Rugby League centrally and the other clubs to carry on? And the answer would be, on the basis of what we've seen so far and the fact that they didn't even give Lee a full amount to be part of the competition, the answer would be no. I mean, the negotiations may have started, but they are not going to get very much because the Super League clubs are not in a position to and will not release very much. But all of that, you would have hoped, would have been something that could have been presented as, this is how we are moving forward. There's more speculation on the back of the TV deal, not less.
The bizarre thing is, of course, when people talk about rationalising the leagues below Super League, is they always look to cut the likes of Coventry and West Wales, who, as you say, are financially stable, rather than clubs of 150 years old who aren't. But contraction is not a good thing, and I guess we're kind of surprised we got through most of the COVID situation without losing any clubs, which is a positive. But there is an obvious need for change, isn't there? Inside Super League and out, and whether that, again, it's people dreaming of £1 million TV deals for the Championship, and as I tweeted last week, it's amusing that people always slag off Super League if they're a club outside, but A, they'd love to be in it, and B, they do the same with League One and would love to cut them adrift so they can have an extra tenner a week to play on some third-rate Australian who's come over here to, play rugby league and no one cares. It's... used the phrase in denial there, and I've used a comparison before to Speedway or whatever. I'll use ice hockey as an example this time. Mid-90s, riding high, 2 games a week live on Sky, 16,000 people going to Manchester, watching a match, the grand final at the end of the season, the playoff final, sold out at the arena in Manchester, lost the TV deal. That was it. And their league has contracted, their top division. It's expanded and contracted and gone and so on and so forth, but they've never been able to get that big TV deal again. We've got to be smarter. And the fact that a club has existed for 150 years, 100 years, whatever, it doesn't matter, because unless you can be sustainable, why should the sports... Well, it's almost like it's turned into the things with the European Super League, whatever, is it, and football and payments, solidarity payments. In a sport which doesn't have much money, where does it come from to keep clubs alive who may not be sustainable?
Well, I think the other thing about that is you're absolutely right that there has been a need for change. And there was a need for change pre-COVID. COVID gave you the time and space to decide what you wanted that change to be, in the knowledge that you were going to, in the short term at the very least, get a lesser TV deal. This is not new. And that how were you going to persuade either the broadcaster that you were with in 2 or 3 years' time when it comes up for renewal again, or other broadcasters if you're going to have a multi-platform deal further down the line, that you are worth investing in? And we seem to have missed a window for change. And there has to be change. There has to be a change in terms of governance. There has to be a change in terms of structure. There has to be a change in terms of realising what our audience wants and how you attract a new audience to sustain a sport when your traditional one is under threat, which clearly it is, both economically, geographically, and in an age profile. None of this is new, but we had the time to do something, and we seem to have stood still and gone, let's hope we survive this, and breathing out when we have, and then gone, now we've walked straight into a hailstorm. Well, you saw that cloud on the horizon even pre-COVID. So I think the disappointment is that we still haven't done anything that would be termed change. There are other sports that are looking at change. There is no comparison with the NRL, but it's one that we can hold a mirror up to. They are looking at a 17th and an 18th team. Expansion, as we said probably a year ago, is on their agenda. They had to stabilise their sport, the same as everybody did, to come out of COVID in the best way that they could, pay some money back to broadcasters, renegotiate a new deal so that they knew what money they had in the immediate short term to sustain the clubs that were already there. But they're looking at where they take the state of origin. It's going back to Perth. They're looking at 17th club being in Brisbane because they reckon they've got a market there that's a traditional one that can be exploited because it's not fully at its maximum at the moment. But they're also looking at maybe a second team in New Zealand and or a team in Perth. Well, that's a plan. I mean, it may not be the perfect plan. It may upset some of the people that would prefer to see Newtown back in the competition, and they're looking at conferences. And again, it's caused division because the way they've divvied it up might be all of the expansion teams in one conference and all the traditional teams. But they're looking at things. There are proposals out there Where are our proposals? I don't see them. We know that people have worked pretty hard on putting some suggestions together that was out there to attract a corporate finance bid, which was attracted. But unless the sport itself is prepared to change the way it operates, nobody's going to invest in it, and it's going to look the same. And if the power is still going to be invested solely really in the hands of the clubs that are in Super League, then it's not going to attract a broadcasting deal further along the line. It's not going to attract somebody from the outside that, if they put their money in, want to say in how the competition will look going forward. And we are, as you say, contraction is never a good thing. I think there's another question here that nobody I've seen has asked, but it's valid, and I don't know if there's an answer. But when Super League wanted to break away, there were two rationales behind it. One was changing the power base as it existed to give them, those who felt disenfranchised amongst the Super League organisation, more of a say. That was quite a personal thing directed at Nigel Wood and relationships that people thought he had with people like Gary Hetherington. That was one reason. The other reason was because they wanted to employ their own marketing division, for want of a better word, where they were prepared to spend a lot of money to get more commercial backers and a better TV deal. So here we are almost 3 years down the line. I reckon conservatively, in terms of the money that they paid for their own chief executive, the offices that they have hired, the money that they've spent on redesigning a logo and putting into the programmes that were commissioned, not far short of £2 million, and they're in a worse position. Now, somebody is accountable for that. And again, I'm not saying that it's any one person. It might well have been a cabal of people. And certainly one of those people being Eamon McManus seems to have switched from being very pro at the beginning to seeing the cons at the end. But someone like, for example, Ian Lenigan, who was clearly at the forefront of the drive for change, is party to the loss of £2 million at a time when the sport can't afford it, but is still going on television saying everything's fine. I mean, again, we need some rigorous investigation into what money has been wasted and by whom and on what, and who's accountable for it.
We don't do inquiries because there's no point looking backwards, because we'll never repeat any of these mistakes, and they are in the future.
And the answer will be it's their money that they've wasted anyway, which may be a very fair answer, but the whole of the sport is now going to feel the draft of all of that. So, there are Championship clubs and League One clubs who may find that there is no money left in the pot. So that £2 million is suddenly a concern of more people than just those who have spent the £2 million, because there's a knock-on effect. I mean, I think it's relatively fortunate for the RFL that they have just sold Red Hall for £1.65 million, because that money is keeping them going at the moment.
Great memories of that day processing about Wakefield's points deduction there. That was great fun. Of course, one thing Super League has been successful in is their podcast is higher than ours. So well done to Robert Elston and Will Perry. And our colleague John Wilkin, who's on it, obviously. So
we can take some credit.
Yeah, we'll take credit for anything, won't we? We are that thing. I'm just waiting for Super League to employ that fella who wears a Leeds Rhinos jacket on YouTube, eating food, to do a pie review, because he's got loads of viewers, like 500,000 people watch him eat food.
Well,
I don't know how these things work, but yeah, he wears a Rhinos top and everything. So if he's not employed by Super League, I'm expecting him in the Leeds Rhinos squad next week.
He'd get a game at the moment.
It might be more popular than Kyle Eastman, I don't know, but we'll come on to the games in a minute, and I guess we come on to the games now, unless there's any other news apart from the obvious one we haven't spoken about yet.
Well, as we're talking, the disciplinary is meeting, so yes, I assume nothing has been formally announced other than a charge has been levied. It's a very high tariff. We don't know until we get the details of the hearing whether it's being contested or not. So if you're watching or listening to this and you do know the outcome, we are speaking on a more theoretical level about what it means and the implications of it.
In general terms, yes.
The shame is that we had an ideal build-up to the Wigan Hull game. Now, we've all, and I think everybody agrees, that we need to promote a little bit more rivalry in matches. We need to have a headline. The story going into that was Hardaker Connor. Full credit to Zach for coming out and saying, I'm the best fullback there's been for 10 years, and I hear that Sam Tompkins would wear the England jersey if Sean Wayne was to pick his team today, but I genuinely think I'm better than him, and this bloke called Connor, yeah, well, I'll take care of him. Brilliant. Now, absolutely brilliant. And everything, I think some people will have tuned in to watch that game just to see how that started. And as it happened, it seemed to me, if we're talking on-field stuff, that maybe Jake Connor was a bit spooked by it all, because clearly got sin-binned for an attack on Hardaker's nose and gave away a soft penalty that proved to be the difference between the teams. So all of that would have been a fabulous talking point until none of it became a talking point. And the only thing that did on, ironically, the weekend where, we're trying to promote
it's all your fault, social media. It's nothing to do with us. It's all your fault.
But abuse is the topic that we were all trying to show our solidarity behind lessening. And we get an incident placed on report for abuse, for racial abuse as well. And I guess I understand why Andre Cervello would have explained his position on social media post-match. I'm really not sure he should have used the exact words, because I think that does prejudice a fair trial. And I think if this was in a court of law, before you've had any response from the alleged, they need to decide what their position is. Are they going to plead guilty? Do they want a hearing? But it's already in the public domain exactly what it's alleged they've said. I'm not sure that is the smartest thing to do. I think he could very easily have gone on social media and said, why would I make this up, and leave it at that. But I think once you publish the words that you are the basis of the case, there's an ethical issue there as to the due process of law. The fact that the RFL then produced a grade F shows that they're taking it very seriously. Wigan then produced a joint statement with Hull saying effectively we'll do whatever is necessary, which I got the impression that they have a hint that it's going to be undefendable in some way, and they, because they've stood their player down before the results of this review, that they feel that there perhaps is some audio or some evidence that it's going to be very hard for the player to say that they didn't do it. What's more interesting is, what's the punishment? And what's the message you want to send out? Because again, clearly if it's a grade F, we're looking at punitive, a likely long ban if found guilty, possibly the end of that player's career at that club, as he was out of contract at the end of the season anyway. Or, having spoken to somebody over the weekend that's on the diversity board, which is there to all intents and purposes to tell us how, as a sport, we should run our policies on diversity, their preference was for not a ban, but for an educative process, whereby Tony Clubb and Andre Cervello would sit down in a room together with a mediator who is experienced in matters of diversity, and Cervello would say why he was so offended by the comment, and Clubb would say, I now see why that comment would be offensive if indeed that he did, and that would all be filmed and put out as, this is how you go about change. People understand why what they've said is not acceptable, and other people then will see that clearly, because of the way in which it's been handled, that it's not necessarily just a punishment thing. It's learning where the boundaries are. So it'll be very interesting. I suspect he'll get a long ban and everybody will go, the sport really cares about. But I'm still not convinced yet that is the only way of handling it.
what does make me despair is the amount of people who will defend or criticise based on the club a person is employed by. This makes their decision on whether they're guilty or innocent or whatever. And as we know in these cases in sport, the burden of proof is much lower than in a court of law. We saw that with a certain former England football captain who was found not guilty in court but found guilty by the Football Association and now is involved in Rugby League apparently, which is an interesting move. This is almost the first person after this, whether it's involved in this case or one in the future, it's almost like Ben Barber all over again. The sport goes out and we've banned Ben Barber, we're serious about this. Well, yes, we've got the people in the sport who've done the same thing in the past, but forget that. That's the past when that was all right. Now, and again, we've got people in the sport that we know have been banned, have been released from clubs for using racist language on social media, who are employed in the sport. So I can't have in my mind, oh look, we're standing here for 13 seconds, we're kneeling for 13 seconds, we're off social media for a weekend, but I'm employing someone who's racist. So, we're either doing it or we're not doing it. And the problem with the whole thing at the weekend was look at us, look at what we're doing. And I'm not saying everyone was that opinion, but it looks that way when the evidence stares you in the face that it's not the case. And that's the problem here, isn't it? Whatever happens, and whether it's this situation or the next one, is the punishment going to be bigger than... I don't say it should be, because just because of the situation we're in, when others in the past have got away with the same thing. You're right, it is about re-education, isn't it? Because a player gets banned for 8 games, what happens? If they don't apologise, if they don't come out and say, well, I shouldn't have said that, I understand why I shouldn't have said that. There are plenty of people who've been banned for abuse who've never done that. And we saw in football with the Luis Suarez situation where, Liverpool handed that terribly, and you can still find the clips of Kenny Dalglish wearing a Suarez t-shirt when he was about to be banned, and you think, it's not about clubs, it's not about tribal loyalty. That's probably the wrong phrase to use. It's about the right decision for the world at large. I think whatever happens in this situation, we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. It will never be enough for some, and it won't be enough for others.
And I think that's why you've got to have a policy. And if you do have a diversity board, then you have to take into for me, it wouldn't have been, here's a grade F charge. It would have been, it's been referred to the diversity board to guide us on what the punishment should be. So firstly, is he guilty or not guilty? Well, by giving him a grade F, you clearly have some evidence, which may well be audio that's now been picked up and scanned, and in which case, let's say we have the evidence and he's guilty. Let's hear whether he's going to contest that. But the punishment doesn't come from the usual judiciary. It comes from the reason of setting up a diversity board in the first place, because this is exactly what they're mandated to handle. So you're right that whatever the punishment is, there'll be an outcry. But I just get the feeling that Tony Clubb is going to be found guilty. He's going to be given a long ban, and that may well be the end of his Wigan career on the basis of the fact that I don't think he was going to have his contract renewed anyway at the end of the season. But it then isn't dealt with for me. It's what is the sports policy on racism? And people who are racist on social media, are they going to be banned by the clubs that they support? And fans who are found chanting racist abuse in the stands, are they going to be ejected and banned in a similar way that Tony Clubb is going to be? What is our position on whatever abuse actually means? Have we defined it? How are we moving it forward in the future? What is our stance on it? And we'll see. It was sad because clearly and understandably that is all anybody wanted to talk about after what was one of the games of the season. I think the other thing that was interesting from a rugby point of view was that Tony Clubb didn't come back, and nobody said he was injured. But these are two of the most physical teams in the game. You would have thought you needed all your forwards out there as long minutes as they could possibly be be playing at the level of intensity you'd want them to play at. Normally you would not think, particularly as that game went right down to the wire, that you would want to leave off one of your prop forwards, after what was it, 25, 30 minutes. So clearly, I think, all of that needs to be factored in, and we need to take a stand.
Some abuse is allowed, it seems, though, and you can get away with it. Which,
And it's a shame that it was all over the national media as well, because we were going into a weekend whereby abuse was an agenda item, and here we were just before the shutdown, proving why it was still an issue. It wasn't online, but nor should we be too apologetic that we are a mirror of society. Of course, we'd love ourselves to be absolutely squeaky clean, but we'd be naive and stupid to think that there aren't elements within our sport, which is a reflection of our society, that are unsavoury.
My issue always is if I said things that some people have said because they've been proven by sports bodies in my line of work, I would not work again. It's as simple as that. And because if I was a high-profile sports person, I would work again. Or if for some reason I abused high-ranking officials in a sport and I got away with it and worked again. But if I went on this podcast and said someone should go forth and multiply, would I be allowed to go watch Rugby League again? I don't know.
Well, again, a benchmark was set a couple of weeks ago when Richie Myler was banned for 2 matches for questioning the integrity of a match official. Where do you put racial abuse between 2 players? If that's a benchmark punishment, again, a grade F charge in itself doesn't tell you the stance that you're going to take. It just tells you that it's a higher tariff. But I think there's more than this, and if as a society we want to move forward and address some of these issues, it isn't just a punitive ban on one person, and that's the stand, and now we move on and we don't have that problem in the sport anymore.
Abuse, tackle it, kneel for 13 seconds, forget about it.
Well, again, I think at one point we'll come back to that, but I think we've lost that message completely. I think having 13 seconds where you just stand in a line and the referee blows his whistle is now not sending any sort of message whatsoever.
Other than Brian Carney or Bill Arthur saying, we're standing for 13 seconds, or we're kneeling. The players are showing their support for the tackling campaign by wearing a T-shirt. And
again, with no surprise, and not picking anybody in particular, I think it was some of the Wigan players when they'd already stood in front of the empty stand, and the referee blew his whistle. They're waiting and primed to go into one of the big games of the season. Almost were running off before they'd done the 13 seconds, which again just shows you, it's not quite the same as we're ready to kick off, blowing the whistle, everybody does whatever we think they should do to make a statement. We're not doing that. We've got this horrible halfway house at the moment, I think.
I hope people don't see this as criticising the theory of the thing. It's not the theory we're criticising. It's just the practice of the thing.
I'm all for it. I think, the mistake we made, and we wrote we published an article in 4020, if you like, criticising Wakefield, who were the first team not to kneel, who made a decision amongst themselves that they were going to show their solidarity in a different way, although some of them did kneel. And we wrote a piece saying we thought that was wrong, that it undermined whatever the message was. And we got a really good reply that we also published from MP David Hinchcliffe saying, actually, they're not wrong. So we're quite keen to promote greater debate about all of this and show both sides of it. My personal opinion now is that we're not really doing anything. That 13 seconds is a neither here nor there gesture. That actually people aren't really even stopping to think that it's about the tackle it campaign. It's a neither here nor there response.
It's another delay to kick-off times in Super League. I don't think there's anything else to mention about Wigan and Hull, was there? Because it was billed as Hardaker versus Connor, and Hardaker won. I love that poll on Sky where you've got 52% of the vote, and I'm thinking, what's going on there? What's that all about? In games we didn't see because they weren't on TV on Friday, St Helens beat Leigh 22-12, which I think proves everything we say about Saints all the time. Saints fans not happy today because their man is not the coach of the month. It is Adrian Lamb of Wigan. And if you want to complain, Mark Wilson's on the panel, so blame him.
I blame him.
We know him.
Yeah. Well, the thing about that was that, again, Leigh, incredibly competitive for the first half, 6-all. Blown away, I think, in the first 10 minutes of the second half, but hung in there. I think of the two coaches, probably Christian Wolf would be the more disappointed. So I'm sure that is a game that Leigh would not have earmarked necessarily to win, but there wasn't that ruthless streak that I think Wolf would want from his team. Clearly, the injury to James Bentley is an absolute blow because he's been a Trojan for Saints since he got into the first team, and broken leg and some ankle ligament damage is going to keep him out for most of this year, I think. They're hoping he might be back to play for Ireland in the World Cup. But Regan Grace has signed a contract extension for another year when it was rumoured that rugby union clubs were looking at him. So, Saints, I think, are going to have to be better. Stupid thing to say, isn't it? They won all 5 games top of the league, but they are going to have to be better.
They're rubbish. They're no good.
Whereas Leigh just need to pick up a win soon.
Thankfully, I couldn't watch Wakefield versus Catalans because A, I was working, and B, I haven't got a season ticket. But Catalans won 38-18. I tried to watch the highlights and gave up. Only
in the last sort of 12 minutes did Catalan run away with it, which it might be a slight concern for Wakefield that, again, they've not produced an 80-minute performance. But Tom Davis, a hat-trick. I think avid readers of Forty20 magazine, both of you. In the pre-season preview that we did in January, there was a little line in there under Catalan that said, put your money on Tom Davis to be the leading try scorer at the end of the season. He is a brilliant finisher. And that was a good hit back from the Dragons, having been taken apart in the second half against Warrington. I don't know what the answer is at Wakefield, Rich. Clearly, they've got injuries. They're the same as every other club, but the rumour is that Andy Last will be departing as soon as he arrived to join Lee Radford at Castleford next year. I don't know. I don't know. I think there is a groundswell of public opinion amongst avid Wakefield fans saying there needs to be change, whatever that means. But speaking to Willie Poaching briefly at Huddersfield on Sunday, he was saying that, you know, there are some good things going on there. So you pays your money, you takes your choice.
I mean, I don't know if the two things are linked, but as someone pointed out at the weekend, the club released Adam Tangata to get a quarter spot, and then the player who they were rumoured with never was ever going to. Anyway. Wakefield in crisis. There you go. Get some t-shirts made up. Castleford beat Salford on the telly. Speaking of Andy Last and Lee Radford and such, Lee Radford was on the TV. Interesting reading Ross Eppenstall's column today. One player who could be leaving Castleford at the end of the season. Not one of those who's been linked with a move to Warrington, but moving across the heath. Adam Milner could be going to Wakefield, which would be a fascinating sign. I'd make him the captain straight away. Good win for Castleford. Salford I can't work out. And obviously we're going to talk about Huddersfield in a moment and their relieving victory. But you just wonder now with Salford how important, and it's bloody obvious because he was the heart and soul of things for so long, Ian Watson actually was to the whole thing. Yes, they've got some talented players. I'm not saying they haven't, but you don't get to a grand final and a Challenge Cup with that squad if you don't have something special going on that you can't put your finger on. And it does appear that magic might have disappeared in the off-season.
It was all, with the turnover of players as well as the change in coaching staff, it was always going to be difficult to maintain that. I think it was a bit of a tough watch. Wasn't the most flowing of games, and I think even Richard Marshall admitted that even though he might have felt there were a couple of contentious calls, his team were just too indisciplined. They gave away too many penalties to ever be able to put themselves in a position to win that game. They clearly do have some very talented players, and it may well take a little while for some of the new ones who've come in to knit together. I mean, don't forget as well that Joey Lussick was one of their best players last year. Jackson Hastings was their best player the year before. Neither of them are at the club at the moment. It does take some. Niall Evans clearly was germane to the way that they've been playing for the last 2 years. He's not there, so they've lost not just some players, but they've lost some of their very best players, and brought in a coach who is relatively inexperienced as a head coach at the top level. There is always a period of adjustment, and Ian Watson has said exactly the same and is being proved right. But whereas Watson can show incremental improvement, leading to the fact that they have now got their first win, I think Salford do look like a team that are struggling just a little bit to get an identity this year.
No truth that Sailor trying to get the AJ Bell Stadium to retire from Rugby League either. That's just
no. But again, talking to people who know what is happening behind the scenes at Salford because they're close to the club, this is a worry on the horizon. That there is absolutely no doubt that Salford City Council need money. So if there is somebody coming in to say, here is X million pounds, of which a certain percentage will be going to you because you're part owner of the stadium. Peel Holdings, who are the other part owner of the stadium, who obviously saw the Trafford Centre go into liquidation, they're in desperate need of money. And as we saw with all the debate about European Super League, whether it's palatable or not, money talks. And the worry, I think, in the background is everybody's focusing on Sale and what they may or may not do with their wealthy owners. But actually, I think the team that wants to play out of that stadium is the football team, Salford City, who again have very rich owners and backers. And if they decide that they're the second team there with Sale and there is no room for the Red Devils, that's how it'll pan out. And it then becomes, where can the Red Devils possibly play? And if they can't play in Salford, will they be solvent? So I think that there is a concern. There is a backup contingency plan as to where they could play, but it would be deemed Manchester and not Salford. So you'd have the irony of Manchester United, who are playing in Salford but called Manchester, and Salford Red Devils, who are a Salford club playing in Manchester. But I don't think that would be ideal for anybody, and that is a sword hanging over the club's head. And however they're playing at the moment, we talked at the very beginning of this about long-term futures and decreasing money and scenarios that you've got to deal with. The worry for Salford is not, the result in their next game. It's going to be, can they stay at their stadium? And if they can't, what is the alternative?
Moving to Old Trafford. I mean, there is one of the great ironies of sports media is no one ever mentions the fact that Salford City have pretty much bought all their success and going from insignificant non-league club to the Football League based on the fact that someone's put a load of money in. And no, it's a great fairy tale story. No, it's not a fairy tale story. Someone's bought a load of money in.
Well, if somebody can explain to me, and again, I know we're touching on football more than rugby, but it does have a relevance to how you distribute money. How can you claim that there is an open door and the dream is available to everybody when you give parachute payments when teams get relegated, which immediately elevates those clubs to have an unfair advantage in the division they're going into? Now, how they use that money, that's another matter. But what we might see this year is the three teams in football who got relegated from the Premier League being the three teams that go back up again. And two of the three teams that came up going back. Well, if you're telling me that's fair competition and the dream's available for everybody, I must have missed something.
It's part of football's mythology and nonsense that people buy into.
But we need to be aware of that. All of this, promotion relegation is sacrosanct. It's not, because even in the competitions where we've got it and pride it and fans are demonstrating saying these are the areas we want to keep, we haven't got a level playing field.
Who's Rugby League's Gary Neville? Who can come on the telly and slag everything off? Who's that?
It's a club.
Yeah. Fans get annoyed when John Wells is on the telly just because he's currently the director of rugby at CAT, and he won't be soon. On Saturday, we couldn't watch Greg Inglis make his debut, but that's more, the fact that he wasn't fit for the start of the season than anyone else's fault. Sky can't just put Warrington on every week.
Absolutely. Again, you're absolutely right. The thing here is clearly they want to get as many teams on as they can in the early part of the season because that's part of the agreement. They don't start picking their games until later in the rounds. They would not have known when English would be available. Warrington have not exactly been shrinking violets in the early rounds. They've been on most weeks. The one week they're not on, English makes his debut. I think, again, the shame, but for all the right reasons, was with the social media blackout. Nobody could even tweet his try on his return to Rugby League. And full credit to Warrington for not breaking the agreement to show that. But yeah, hysterical overreaction. We can't see it and we can't buy this game. Yeah, that's the agreement. You just can't. But I thought
been able to before.
Because of the media situation at the moment now, anybody can log on to any press conference, whether you're allowed into the game or not. So I did after the Warrington Hull KR game, because they did put up Greg Inglis. And whilst he was, unfortunately for him and the waiting media, particularly those who were at the stadium, taken off for drug testing and didn't come on until an hour after the game finished, he actually spoke really, really well. And very realistic about the way he'd played and why it had taken 5 weeks to get on the field and what he expects over the next 3 or 4 weeks and how hard he hadn't realised, until you hear how often the games come and how long the season is. And he spoke really, really well. And I think his impact is going to be more or as much off the field. He again used the word culture. We've tried to define what that is on a number of occasions, but clearly it's been ultra professional and giving the right lead to the youngsters and imparting your knowledge and experience of what it is to be successful and what you need to do to capture those moments in games where you need to be calm and collected and not the rush of blood to the head and stick to whatever the word process is, which Ian Watson uses a lot, and I think Richard Marshall does as well. And he spoke really, really well, and I think he will be an addition to the club. I got the impression he probably won't be here next year. This is a 1 year only experiment. When Steve Price goes back, he'll go back as well. I don't know whether he's even had a conversation with Darryl Powell about where he might fit in next year, but I think clearly the idea was to get extra interest at the Wolves, to get some more bums on seats, to get some more media interest. And there is a bit of an irony when talking earlier in this podcast about how do you get more money out of television, that the big star for this year made a debut that nobody saw or heard. Well, they didn't hear it if they were listening to local radio, clearly.
But we remember Sonny Bill Williams' debut last year, so sometimes these things are left best left. Elsewhere in Super League, it sounded like a belting game at the John Smith Super Stadium as the Huddersfield Giants beat Leeds 14. Injury ravaged Leeds Rhinos 14-13 in what sounded like a very exciting game. I'm glad it was on national radio. That was good. But big win for Huddersfield. Leeds are just in the same position they've been, haven't they? Although it was interesting listening to Richard Agar after the game with Mark, but Leeds obviously need bodies in key positions and they haven't got them back just yet.
I think, again, it was a game, if I'm being perfectly honest, that you couldn't take your eyes off at the end because it was close. But if you were going to rate it in terms of overall standard, not that high. Both seemed inhibited, didn't want to lose rather than went out to win. Huddersfield had all of their playmakers out there, but even allowing for the fact that they had a couple of tries disallowed, didn't create very much. But they got the 2 points, and I think at this stage in the season, gradual improvement at some point, you then turn that into a win. And how many times have they been on the end of a game that's finished where they're the team cursing the fact that they've lost a 1 point game in the last minute? So their reaction on the final hooter was absolutely understandable. I heard somebody say, "Oh, they think they've won the grand final." Well, actually, when you've been on the wrong end of so many narrow games, when you pull one off yourself, that is like winning a grand final, and they can build on the back of that. They will give St Helens a game this week because it will breed confidence that all of these processes that Ian Watson is talking about are starting to come to fruition. I think the problem for Leeds, even allowing for the fact that they started the second half poorly, that some of their senior players got the wrath of their coach afterwards, and I think it wasn't too difficult to work out who he was aiming that at. They actually did okay to go from 12-4 down at the start of the second half and wondering where another point would come from, because they had a hooker playing in the halves who by then was almost defending on the wing, because he was playing 80 minutes as well as their normal hooker who was playing 80 minutes, and neither of them normally do. Plus they had a winger coming on as a backup loose forward. I get all of that, but with 5 minutes to go, they'd got themselves into a position where they were winning 13-12, and that was pretty gritty. I think everybody knew that there was going to be a short kick-off with 5 minutes to go, and that if Leeds could deny Huddersfield the ball, the worst they would have to do was control 2 defensive sets of 6, and they'd looked pretty solid in defence, apart from one glaring indiscretion at the start of the second half. But they didn't gather the ball from the obvious short kick-off, and from that Huddersfield levelled, and from the restart Huddersfield won. So I would say that the inability to shut down the game in the last 5 minutes was where their Achilles heel was. And yes, you're absolutely right, it's not the number of injuries. A lot of teams have got a lot of injuries. It's in what positions those injuries are, and the fact that they go down 3 or 4 levels in those positions. And a lot of people again are trying to second guess whether Kyle Eastmond is going to be valuable or not. He's played 2 games. You know, he's not been in the sport.
We've made a decision. We've made a decision.
For 10 years.
No good.
You know, Greg Inglis. He didn't have a 10 out of 10 performance. Hasn't played for 2 years. You just go, I don't know what you expect from him. And that was one of the things about Inglis that I liked. You know, I knew I wasn't going to be great, and everybody knew I wasn't going to be great in the group, because you can't expect me to be great because I haven't played for 2 years. Kyle Eastman, where's the leeway? You know, in an ideal world, if everybody was fit, he may have been introduced gradually off the bench. If we had a reserve grade this year, he may have been playing a couple of games there to get his spatial awareness up to date. If we still had dual registration, he might even have had a month at Featherstone. But he was thrown in at the deep end and expected to lead a team without anybody else around him, and it hasn't yet worked for him. But he pulls out in training the day before, and it's that's it then. He's been a waste of money.
Do you fancy a couple of weeks at Wakefield? We're taking everyone from everywhere at the minute, so, you know, you can have squad number 44 or something. I think we're up to that point at the minute. In the Championship, Oldham beat Halifax 16-12.
Great result. One of the results of the weekends that didn't get any PR. That is a really good result for Oldham, and well done, Matt Diskin.
I need to get some Oldham guests on the show, actually. I'll work on that.
And
Sheffield...
whilst we don't look at tables too much, I mean, I suppose at 5 games in the Super League, you can start making some informed ideas of what may happen in the future. And I would say at this stage, Hull are not going to get relegated. So, you know, when they do, you can blame me that after 5 games I made that assertion. But I think they look like they're building something. But Oldham are a mid-table team. They played 4 matches, 50%. They are just under the playoff spots. And I think a lot of people said, you know, they would be down in the relegation mire for most of the season. It can turn around very quickly, but that is a really good start to the year.
20-all draw Sheffield and London in a battle of the expansion teams who are still going.
Yeah, controversy at the end. Looked like it was going to go one way then the other.
That's what we want. Batley, they continue to be good. They beat Newcastle 28-16. Bradford beat Whitehaven 30-22. Widnes 46, Swinton 10, so an important result for Widnes. And York 30, Dewsbury 20. The other way around in terms of where they were, but you know what I mean, doesn't matter. So York seem to have started slow, but now they're picking up the wins, which is important. And I think, say it at the start, but that coup of signing Lindsay Anfield is a coup, because I know at least 2 other clubs who were straight on the phone. Come work for us. So, you know.
I do think, looking at the Championship table again, that we should credit Batley. I know we're only 4 games into a very long season, but, you know, 3rd. That is, you know, Again, a really good start for Craig Lingard and a team that effectively went under the radar when we were talking about all of these teams that applied to be in Super League and want to be full time, or it's going to be among Toulouse and Featherstone and Bradford and York and Widnes. They're all the teams. There's Batley holding their own. 4 matches in, 75%. It's a great start to the season.
What a game on the Our League app on Friday night. Sheffield versus Batley. I mean, I'm not going to watch it because I'll be watching the Challenge Cup, but, what a game that will be.
Mm-hmm.
Friday night on Sky, Catalans, Warrington, St Helens versus Huddersfield. On Saturday on the BBC, Hull, Wigan and Cass Salford, so they can talk about 1985 all over again. Oldham play Whitehaven at lunchtime on Saturday. League One is back. London Scholars, North Wales Crusaders. I've got to scroll down all the under-10s games that the RFL put on their website, which is great and everything, but I'm not really interested on this podcast about York Acorn. I just picked them out at random because they're playing East Leeds under 12s. But very best of luck to all these kids who are playing at the weekend. But
enjoy it. Seriously, there were some figures released from the Yorkshire Junior Leagues, and again, there is still too much abuse on the sidelines and some issues with some of these friendlies. Please just go out and enjoy it and revel in the fact that your offspring might be playing, and give them the environment to thrive, and don't put ridiculous pressure on young referees or young coaches. And it's winning is something you need to learn, but it's this stage not the be all and end all. Please respect you.
Very best of luck to Almondery Spartans and Wakefield Warriors, who are playing in the Yorkshire Men's League Division 2. Their fixtures on 4 times on the RFL's website. So good luck. I don't know where Almondery is, but Wakefield Warriors
near Huddersfield.
You'll be getting a cease and desist order. We've got that name. That's my old hockey team's name. I'm still scrolling down past these Yorkshire men's fixtures. This should be.
I have them here if you want them. I have the
London
fixtures.
Junior League. I'm on Sunday now. We're all right. Swinton, Bradford, London Broncos, Newcastle, Toulouse, Widnes, which has been played in Swinton.
Swinton, yeah. Toulouse again, a bit like Catalan, giving up their home advantage to keep integrity in the competition, and full credit to Toulouse for doing that.
Dewsbury, Halifax, and York Fev, which. You know what I would be tempted to pay for, because I think that'd be a good game. Hunslet, Workington in League One, Cov versus Borough. Come on, up the Bears. Keighley, Doncaster, Rochdale versus West Wales, and the women's quarterfinals are on this weekend as well, but they're not on the website because I can't see them on a different bit. The game on the here we are on the Sportsman.com is going to be York City Knights versus Wigan. At the home of Rugby League, the Mobile Rocket Stadium in Wakefield. 12 o'clock kickoff for that one. Followed by Leeds Bradford, which I can't show them both at the same ground. And at the other end of the country at Warrington versus Cass, and Saints versus Fev. You know what? That Featherstone Rovers, you've got to give them due respect. They've played the 2 grand finalists in the first 2 weeks of the season, and now they've got St Helens, who are probably the best team in the comp in the Challenge Cup. There's no
hiding place.
No excuses from Jess Hammond, who was captain in Fev at the weekend because Andrea Dobson had a head knock, so she couldn't play. No excuses, just outplayed. They're looking forward to it. They're going to have a go. Go on, Fev. It's another exciting weekend of Rugby League.
The Challenge Cup. I mean, first of all, on the Challenge Cup, I really don't know why Sheffield and Batley are playing at the same time as St Helens and Huddersfield. That when all of these competitions this week are run by the RFL, the Challenge Cup and the Championship and League One, you wouldn't have thought there would be any clashes.
I'm going to assume it must be to do with the availability of the stadium, but even so, there's no one there, so just play somewhere else. But
if there's nobody there, why not play at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever? Anyway. Interesting that you often do get a cup fixture that follows a League One. All 4 of these have been played within the last fortnight. 2 of them were played last week, and they're repeats. So you got Hull and Wigan and Salford and Castleford. So your form line goes back literally about 5 days. But the other 2, Castellan and Warrington and Saints and Huddersfield, were played a fortnight ago. So I think that adds even extra interest to this round of the Cup. And I wouldn't like to say who's the favourite between Castellan and Warrington. I think Castellan have got the point to prove after coming unstuck against the Wolves. And Warrington will still feel that they're not hitting their best form just yet. Saints, who didn't look vulnerable against Lee, but clearly, I think even Christian Wolff admitted, were not at their best against a Huddersfield team that have absolutely nothing to lose. I think that'll be a really, really interesting game. Hull and Wigan, I know Hull have got a couple of injuries, and clearly we don't think Tony Clubb will be playing for Wigan. But again, there's already a bit more added feeling in that game, because the focus will be on, there was a big incident there, and Hardaker Connor Mark II and all that. You can build that up and cast Salford. In some respects, for both of those teams, a trip to Wembley is the most likely chance of silverware this year. I think Castleford they were certainly my outside bet for getting and possibly winning the final in Darrell's last year. But, Salford were at Wembley last year. They know what it takes. It's interesting. I don't think you can pick a winner in any of these four games with a degree of certainty.
Just imagine social media if Greg English doesn't play on Friday.
I don't think he will.
It's going to be great. No,
I mean, Matty Ashton's
in. It's hard for him to play back-to-back games, isn't it, when he's coming off 2 years off?
Yeah, and again, Hull KR play a very different style to Catalan. If you're going to be exposed physically, it's playing that big Catalan side. I think it'd be interesting to see how injured Matty Ashton is, and whether that means the return of Blake Austin with Ratchford moved to fullback. But Tom Lynham as well to fit in at some point in that back division. So it'd be very interesting to see the choices that Steve Price makes. But I think the best English can hope for is a place on the bench.
Jackson Hastings will be looking to impress Sean Wayne in front of the BBC cameras. I wonder if they've got Sean Wayne on the panel again, because they had him on last time.
It's a great debate, and again, we've had this hundreds of times, not least with somebody who doesn't like the thought of anybody with an Antipodean accent pulling on a shirt of the red, white, and blue.
But Tolson Tollett was born here; he's allowed in the squad.
But if you're eligible, and if the guy is the best in his position at the moment, are you not just cutting off your nose to spite your face to not select him?
What if the Australians only picked Australians?
Well, I'm sure they've got Italians in their team, never mind Pacific Islanders.
When Tolson Tollett was playing for London Broncos, you never thought in 25 years' time we'd be doing the sports news on the BBC World TV, did you? But it's a strange old world. It is a strange old world. I think we've covered everything. And hopefully next week, things will be back to some kind of normal on this thing. And we'll have a guest on and everything. But what a fun nearly 80 minutes of Rugby League. That's what we should call this podcast, the nearly 80 minutes. That's a good idea. That's
never catch on.
No. When do I need to write my column for, Phil?
This week for sure.
I thought it was this week. Yeah, I better watch some telly. Writer's block this month. I don't know why, but I have ideas.
Good man. Get them on paper.
Yeah, that's going to be the next challenge. Phil, thank you very much for your time.
Good to see you, as always.
And yourself. Thank you to the viewers and listeners of this ramshackle affair. Unlike usual, there'll be no graphics on screen, so you just have to pretend you know what program it is, because this laptop is very slow. And if I tried to edit it, it would be up on Wednesday next week. So I'm not even going to bother. So I'm just going to press stop and upload it. And it'd be like the good old days. You just have to pretend we're live, even though we are definitely not. But we'll see you again next week.